And welcome to a special remote bookmark when our guest author is Dr. Peter Kreeft, author of Ask the 100 Most Interesting Questions He's Ever Been Asked. He responds to that. Also another book on 52 big ideas, and we'll talk about some other big ideas he's had in over 80 books he's written over many, many years. Welcome, Dr. Kreeft, to EWTN's Bookmark. Great to have you again.
Very much. Privileged to be here.
Right. The last time I got to see you was before the Boston Red Sox actually won a World Series, so it gives us a perspective of how long ago that was.
That was a collective hallucination. The Red Sox cannot win a World Series. That didn't really happen.
No. What about in your book? Didn't you write it? You wrote one novel, right? And what's that novel about?
It's called An Ocean Full of Angels, and I have a copy of it here. And let me read the subtitle because that tells you what the book is about. It is about the connections between Jesus Christ, Mohammed, dead Vikings, sassy black feminists, Dutch Calvinist seminarians, large mother substitutes, armless nature mystics, Caribbean rubber dancers, 3 popes in 1 year, Cortez, Romeo and Juliet, the wandering Jew, the sea serpent, Our Lady of Guadalupe, the demon Huracano, Islam in the art of body surfing, the universal fate wave theory, the Palestinian Intifada, the fatal beauty of the sea, dreams of Jungian archetypes, the dooms of the Boston Red Sox, abortion wars, the great blizzard of '78, the wisdom of the handicapped, the ecumenical jihad, the psychology of suicide, the disguises of angels, and the end of the world, among other things.
It sounds like a little bit of so many pieces of you've written over the years, you kind of included all of them in that novel. Is that the only novel you've ever written?
Yes, it took me almost 20 years to finish it, so I'm not going to do another one.
Okay, so was George Steinbrenner, was he in there somewhere as part of the apocalypse, maybe from a Boston Red Sox perspective, or?
Well, he's gotten his comeuppance, I think.
There you go. Okay, so let's talk about this book, Ask Peter Kreeft, the 100 Most Interesting Questions. When they asked you about writing this book, I guess you responded yes. What was your initial reaction when Sophia asked you?
I proposed it to Sophia rather than vice versa. Just remembered that the Q&A sessions are always much more interesting than the lecture monologues. So I wrote a book about them. Instead of monologue, I wrote dialogue.
So let me ask you a question. Let's go through some of the questions that are in the book. Who are your favorite philosophers?
I'm very unoriginal. My favorite philosophers are Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and Pascal.
Right. Another question you have in here, I can tell from your writing that you certainly have a sense of humor and a great wit. But does God have a sense of humor? That's a question you answered in this book.
No one who has ever gone to a zoo and looked full in the face of an ostrich can possibly doubt that God has a sense of humor.
Okay. In religion, you respond to this question, and it's something I think we probably see more today than ever before. Why are there more women than men in church?
Oh, that's a complex question. Probably because women are more sane than men, and more practical, and religion is terribly practical. I mean, what sentence has ever been uttered by any human being that is more practical than this one? What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his own soul?
Right. One time I heard you in a quote with an interview you did not too long ago with our own Father Mitch. You talked about the fact that I guess theologians turn into heretics, but philosophers are either crazy or insane. You're a philosopher. Do you consider yourself kind of crazy?
Only when I deal with computers. Where I have torture and dismemberment fantasies against Bill Gates and Microsoft Word. But no, a minority of us philosophers are still sane and commonsensical, even though a majority are quite insane. We have a saying in academia, that idea is so crazy you have to have at least 2 PhDs to believe it.
Right, exactly, to believe it. Now, in the section on Catholicism, there's a question, why are you Catholic? Some people might say today, as a convert, why are you still Catholic with all the issues in the church we're dealing with?
Well, one simple answer is the one Walker Percy gave. What else is there? But my answer is, well, there's only one honest good reason for believing what the Catholic Church teaches, because it's true. We don't practice it very well, but it's true. If there's no gap between your preaching and your practice, either your practice is so high that you're a saint, or your preaching is so low that you're a sinner.
Now, you yourself, here's a question. If you were Pope, what would be the first thing you would do?
Answer that in one word: resign, for the sake of the church.
So that would be it. Just bail out.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And why? Why do you think? Because you just don't feel that you would be qualified, or why?
Absolutely unqualified. That would be like making me a computer programmer.
Mm-hmm.
I would destroy everything I touched.
Okay. Now, in Sin and Evil, in that section, it says, do you believe in original sin? And I guess what the corollary I asked with that, do you think the problem is the society or people don't believe in original sin anymore?
Well, first of all, where does the evil in society come from, except from people who make it?
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, if you don't believe in original sin, you're not reading many headlines in newspapers lately, are you?
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think sometimes, and you deal in academia, and some people would say that a lot of the quote-unquote utopian kind of ideas seem to float around in there. Do you see that in many ways as a denial of original sin, that people will just do the right thing if they're led in the right direction?
Yeah, that's the old heresy of Rousseau, that people are good and institutions are bad, as if the devil invented human institutions rather than we did. That's certainly not the case. At the opposite extreme, there's also the heresy of kind of a nihilism or cynicism or pessimism. That's the refusal to believe in goodness.
Right. Now, in the area of the supernatural, which I think obviously a lot of people watch EWTN are quite interested in, the question is, have you ever seen an angel?
I don't know. Quite possibly. The Bible tells me that we are to be very careful to exercise hospitality to strangers, because many have entertained angels unaware.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in heaven I'll find out the answer to that question.
Mm-hmm. What about ghosts? You answer that question as well.
I've never seen a ghost, but I've talked to many people who seem very sane and reliable who have.
Mm-hmm. What's the difference between an angel and a ghost, in a sense of somebody meeting up with one?
A ghost is the soul of a human being whose body is dead, but whose soul is usually not at rest and working out some sort of purgatory. An angel isn't supposed to have a body, never did, never will. An angel is a different species, a pure spirit.
Mm-hmm. Now, in this dealing with your books and music, and I guess the number's around 80, and I saw you've got about 4 that came out within the last 9 months or so, and you're at least working on another 5 that I see. Let me ask you, in relation to, how do you find the time and how do you decide the topics for the books you're working on?
Well, I'll tell you what I know, and I'll tell you what I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So
it's like asking a woman, how do you get pregnant?
Okay.
Well, the way everybody else does.
There you go. Now, you've written more than 80 books, so do you actually answer which one is your favorite? Because every time anybody asks people, they say, well, all my children, I don't have a favorite. But do you have a favorite?
In many different ways. The novel took most blood, sweat, and tears. The one that I'd make everybody read to begin with, if I could, is Jesus Shock. Probably the best written one is ones when I deal with great philosophers like Aquinas or Augustine or Pascal.
Mm-hmm. So why is it, I noticed you said that about that, I can understand the novel, the Jesus Shock. Why is that the book you'd want everybody to read?
Because that tries to do as much as a book can do to put you face to face with Jesus and realize his shocking claims and overcome your sleepiness and your comfortable, convenient categories and the idea that there's nothing new to learn here.
Mm-hmm. Now, like many people, you're a fan of Chesterton, and you answered a question. Tell us one practical thing you learned from Chesterton.
Ooh, it's like saying, which potato chip do you like the most?
Mm-hmm.
Almost everything Chesterton says is eminently practical. One thing that comes to mind is the point at the beginning of orthodoxy, namely that it is logic rather than magic, mysticism, fantasy, or fairy tales that makes you insane.
Why do you think Chesterton rings so true even today?
He never went to the university. He was never corrupted. His life as it is.
Okay.
And he seems to be terribly paradoxical because he's not. He's right side up and we're all upside down. So he looks upside down.
Okay. Now are you really ever a surfer or a boogie boarder, or what exactly were you? Why did you focus on surfing in so many of your books?
Well, first of all, a boogie boarder is a surfer. Boogie boards aren't sponges. They're just very small surfboards that you hop on instead of stand on. And you can do with them pretty much the same things you can do with a stand-up surfer. And why do I write about it? Because I love it. And that's a way of having a kind of a mystical experience. You forget yourself and your self-consciousness and your worries and all your life on land. And you enter what is a kind of a natural symbol of infinity, the ocean. And you go where the great waves move you, and that's great training for obeying the will of God and trusting in divine providence.
Was that something you got into as a youth, or did that come to you later in your life?
As a youth, my father took me to the Jersey Shore, where I learned to surf. It was back in the 40s and 50s.
Okay.
Back when the dinosaurs were running through our backyards. I think it was the Jurassic Age.
So where were you living at the time that you went to the Jersey Shore? Where were you actually growing up?
New Jersey.
Okay.
Born in Paterson, New Jersey.
Okay. You and Lou Costello, right?
Yeah.
That's right. That's where your comedy comes from. Now, in another book you've got here, it was called 30. These are questions of ethics for beginners. 52 big ideas from 32 great minds. I guess one of the questions: why are all the great minds dead? Is it because there's no good ideas, or we need some time to evaluate their greatness?
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't have a crystal ball to see whether the present lack of great philosophers is going to last or not. But certainly the great ones are dead. If you were to demand of me to name a single living philosopher who is truly great and will be recognized as a major philosopher hundreds of years from now, I couldn't answer that question. I'd say probably Alasdair MacIntyre comes to mind.
Now, you kind of coalesce all of these different thinkers, but clearly they obviously don't agree with each other, do they?
No, and that's the greatness of philosophy. It's a dialogue. You learn a lot from mistakes as well as from truths, because we appreciate things by contrast. So this goes through the history of ethics, that division of philosophy, which is probably the most important and the most practical, talked about good and evil. And it just takes the big ideas that you're going to remember for the rest of your life-changing ideas, and explains them in a simple way that beginners can understand.
Now, you talk about the idea, and you even refer to it as that the ethics is not a PS to life, and you say that it's not an afterthought. Do you think that is in fact what we're seeing today in this world, that ethics are an afterthought?
Yes, most people are much more concerned with getting on in the world in whatever they're doing, whether it's law or business or nursing or entertainment, than they are about the ethics of it.
Okay.
So ethics is kind of don't forget your umbrella when you go out because it might rain. But the most important thing in ethics is what's the meaning and the value and the point and the purpose and the good of doing anything. What is the meaning of life? What is the greatest good?
Right. Well, let me think about that in the sense of ethics today. It seems to be, does ethics impact, has it been impacted negatively by this move to this kind of away from objective truth to subjective view of things, in which case ethics becomes subjective as well?
Well, if you're a subjectivist, you can't really do ethics in the proper sense at all. All you can do is create your own values, which is like inventing a new game with your own rules. And that's the official philosophy of the Supreme Court, according to the Webster decision in 1992, Justice Kennedy's famous mystery passage. the heart of liberty is the right to decide for yourself the meaning of life and the mystery of human existence. In other words, God, get out of my seat.
Right. I always wondered with that one whether it was just a function of he needed to come up with a rationale to do what he wanted to do, or if he actually believed that.
He actually believed it. He's repeated it in different words many times since then. Yes, he's one of these deconstructionists.
Now, one of this, in the books you've written a lot about surfing. You've also written a bunch of books related to Socrates. And we talk about Socrates, a good person does not worry much about the little things like whether he lives or does, but only about the big things, whether a person is good or bad. How do you determine whether a person's good or bad? And would Socrates agree with your evaluation?
Well, we've got a thing called conscience, which is not just a feeling, but a seeing, a kind of intuitive seeing that there is good and bad, and that good is good and bad is bad, and that you ought to be good and not bad. And the content of good and bad doesn't change that much from one culture to another. There's never been a culture which says it's bad to obey the Ten Commandments and good to disobey them. But we just intuitively know that. The human heart was designed in heaven, not in Harvard or in Hollywood.
Now, in writing the various Socrates books, had you ever thought about writing one that was Socrates meets Kreeft?
Oh, that's ridiculous. That would be like writing a book in which Hamlet meets Shakespeare. You know, the character doesn't meet the author. I thought of writing one in which Socrates meets Buddha. I couldn't do that.
Right. Of the Socrates books that you wrote, which was your favorite? Which did you think succeeded the best?
Probably Socrates meets Jesus, where he actually doesn't meet Jesus personally, but meets Christians at Harvard Divinity School of all places.
Do those people still exist? Or I guess there might be some.
Oh
there.
yeah. But I've never heard a peep out of anybody from Harvard about that book about Harvard. Because Harvard is heaven, and once you're in heaven, you don't worry about earth anymore, right?
Now, one of the books, you have various books where sometimes you bring people together, and you've got books you recommended as well, and most of them here that I had a list that I found that you recommended were all written by Catholics or Christians, certainly, I guess Christians, but you also have Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Why did you pick that one out?
Because it's the most prophetic book of the 20th century. You want to know where Western culture is headed, read that book. Huxley was a kind of universalist mystical Buddhist, and his own personal philosophy is a mixture of profundity and profound mistakes. But that book is just unique. It's a novel. It's a fascinating novel, a fantasy novel, written in 1930. It sounds as if it was written today.
Right.
And it's about the end of family and motherhood and fatherhood and religion and all the other things that seem to be dying in Western.
It's amazing in some ways because it was, a very popular book in certainly the 60s and the 70s and things like that. And so you would think a vast majority of people who went to high school, even Catholic high schools, read that book. You would think they'd have some sense of seeing it around them happening. Why don't they notice it?
It's a good question. I don't know. I remember the first time I taught it, I naively assigned the students the book over a vacation, thinking that they'd understand it. And then when we came back to discuss it in class, I found that most of the class didn't fundamentally understand it. And then I suddenly realized, to my chagrin, that most of them thought it was a utopia rather than a dystopia, and that Huxley was trying to sell it rather than warn us against it. And they were astonished when I told them it was the opposite. They said, but everybody's happy now. There's free sex and free entertainment, and you can do what you want, and there's total freedom. Who cares if it's meaningless?
Right. Yeah, that's interesting that we see that as a progressive, positive future for mankind rather than a dystopian one, like you said. Right.
Yeah.
Now, you wrote several books that have somewhat to do with, like, quote unquote, the culture wars. You wrote a book years ago called How to Win the Culture War, The Call, Enemies, and Battlefields. Looking back at that book, how'd we do?
Well, that's like asking Germany, how did Nazism do? Or asking the Red Sox, how did they do between 1918 and 2004?
Mm-hmm.
But the culture wars are not fundamentally about culture. They're fundamentally about the human being and the human soul. Just because the culture is dying doesn't mean that individuals are dying. We still rise up and protest. We are better than our culture.
Mm-hmm. You wrote something called the Snake Bite Letters. What made you decide to do that, and how was it received?
Well, what made me do it was, of course, the Screwtape Letters,
Mm-hmm.
C.S. Lewis's spiritual classic, and the genre. Looking at things from the devil's point of view is something that can be easily imitated and properly imitated. So I tried to imitate it. And I don't think it was a terribly profound book, but it's got some insights in it, and it's kind of funny. And it's a way of critiquing our present society from kind of the devil's point of view. I don't know why more people don't write those kind of books. There are a few examples. There could be many more.
When you're writing, do you write multiple books simultaneously, or do you work in sequence?
Usually I'm working on more than one book at a time because I have ADD and I get bored very easily. When I get bored with an hour or two at one book, I go to another. ADD is a kind of a blessing in disguise, because if you get bored very easily, then you don't bore readers. You bore yourself, you probably don't bore other people. Don't bore yourself, you probably do bore other people.
Jumping back to your book on the philosophers, you made a point in talking about the fact that I'm appalled by the fact that 90% of the best philosophy students at the best universities would say they cultivate diversity, have exactly the same political correct opinions, whether of the left or the right.
Yeah. After one of the presidential elections, I forget which, a reporter came to Boston College and informed the theologian that he was interviewing that there was a poll taken the previous year about how many people in the world's leading 30 or 40 universities donated any time or money of their own life to work for either political party election. And they expected that there would be more Democrats than Republicans, and they were a little surprised that Harvard had only an 89% versus 11% disparity, most Democrats. Princeton, for instance, had 99% work for Democrats and 1% for Republicans. There was one university that had 100% work for Democrats and 0 for Republicans. That was Boston College. And the reporter asked the theologian what he thought about that. The theologian replied with a straight face, "I am very proud of our faculty. We cultivate diversity." In other words, it's exactly like in George Orwell's 1984. In Newspeak, everything is its opposite.
That's right. Newspeak.
Diversity means uniformity.
Double think. Another book you have that's come out is called Probes, Deep Diving into St. John's Gospel. What prompted that book?
My own experience with John's Gospel, which rewards probing questions, and which has a depth which is like the ocean. And I thought, if you actually ask questions that naturally come to mind, one by one, when reading John's Gospel slowly and carefully, the answers would be tremendous. And the world itself would not be large enough to contain the answers, but maybe the world is large enough to contain some of the questions. So I just went through John's Gospel, asking leading questions, over 1,000 of them, and left the reader to find the answer.
Right. Another book you've got coming out, at least you're working on, I saw, it's called Confessions of a Cafeteria Catholic. They said cafeterias are at risk because of the COVID-19. Are there still a lot of cafeteria Catholics? Did you ever consider yourself one?
No, cafeteria Catholic picks and chooses, and Book Catholic eats all the food that Mother Church puts on her plate.
Well, we're just about out of time, Dr. Kreeft. We really appreciate. We know you're on a tight schedule. We thank you so much for joining us. Our audience at EWTN always appreciates hearing from you, of course, and we appreciate you giving us the time. And we're talking to Dr. Kreeft about Ask Peter Kreeft, the 100 most interesting questions he's ever been asked, and also a book on philosophers and many other books, all available through our catalog. Thank you very much, Dr. Kreeft, for being with us.
Thank you. It's fun for me too. God bless you.
God bless all of our audience. We'll see you next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark. Thanks for joining us.